Welcome everybody in the Off the Ball Network fandom and beyond to your usual weekly affair here on Monday nights. We are proud to say a staple of the Off the Ball Network Facebook and Twitter page, and of course our own YouTube. It is the Bunts and Bruises Podcast coming to you guys live here on a just beautiful Monday night. It's been beautiful weather for both. I'm assuming for both of us today. It's been pretty good weather for me over here in NYC. I'm assuming it's the same with my Jersey boy over there. Speaking of which, of course, as always, one half of your dynamic duo, as my new nickname is now the Iceman, with you, the hockey guy of OTB and Jurg. And of course, as always, I'm just joined by one of the best in the sports media business today. He is I always think of, ways I can introduce this man. I think this is the perfect way because I just learned today, ladies and gentlemen, that Mickey Mantle has the same date of birth as me. So the Mickey Mantle of baseball knowledge here on the show, my guy, James Barcia.
How you doing today, Jurgen? You get better and better with it every day. You're starting to pull out fun facts now for the people. That's it. You're throwing the fun facts into the intros. I don't know how you get better than that. But you're right. It was a beautiful day today. It went out, played 9 holes of golf. Did god awful as per usual.
May have been yelled at because of it.
Yeah, but it's all right. She knows I'm bad at it, so she lets me wallow in it. But it is what it is. I'm excited though, man. We got a lot going on today. We're talking, the NHL ended, but now we're talking about the fun part. It's the off season. It's the beginning. New hope, new dreams. Tampa Bay is gonna three-peat. It doesn't matter realistically, but it's the thought. Makes people feel good, all warm and fuzzy inside. So we got, we're talking about the expansion draft, and we're talking about craziness that happened this weekend, Jurg. And we actually have a cool guest. And, it's going to be a great show for the people. It's going to be an amazing show.
It absolutely is. We have a big show here today. Very hockey-centric at the beginning before we bring our guest on later. A close friend of James will be coming on the show to give us a professional point of view on injuries that have been happening in sports. I feel like in the pandemic-riddled seasons, going back to the ones last year and, of course, continuing on here into 2021, injuries have been a plague to the sports over, these at least 3 of the 4. I'm sure it definitely had to have some effect on football as well. So we'll just say all 4, but especially like we can specifically name it with basketball. We can definitely name it with baseball this season, James. And hockey and football have also had their issues here and there. Of course, Tampa Bay fans have absolutely no issues with it, but them's the breaks. But before we continue on, James, of course you because you messaged me about this prior to starting, like you want to start off today's show with a little just. I don't know. I don't want to necessarily like label it something as an update, but something happened in Major League Baseball within these last couple of days that we just wanted to, address really fast.
Yeah, man. I mean, if you haven't heard about it, there's no way we couldn't start today's show without addressing it. It happened to be, if you haven't heard, you've been living under a rock, but there was a shooting that happened outside of Washington Nationals Stadium. It was a San Diego Padres Nationals game, happened around the 6th inning. 3 people were hurt, but no one that was in the stadium, thankfully. It was anyone who was involved with the shooting were the ones that were hurt. All 3 seem to be actually okay. It seems like their condition is going to be all right. Legal matters, handle whatever. But I really just want to address this situation because it was craziness in the stadium, but you got to give a quick shout out to specifically Manny Machado, Will Myers, and Fernando Tatis. For those who don't know, everyone was panicking in the stadium. There was an announcer on the speakers telling people, hey, stay in the stadium, it's safer, because they finally got word of what's happening. But when you're in that situation with everything going on in the world today, it's kind of whatever safety protocol you throw out the window. You do all instinct. And crazy enough, these 3 men, they actually went up to the fence that separates the field to the fans, and they opened it up. They led them. Some of them was picking people up. I'm pretty sure it was Machado picked somebody up and dragged them right into the dugout. So big shout out to all 3 of those guys, man, because that's real heroic stuff right there. You're thinking guys who are literally worth hundreds of millions of dollars would never even think another day of some Joe Schmoes like us. But shows really at the end of the day, these are just people, man. And, it's always good to see a fellow man watching out for a fellow man. So I just want to give them a quick shout out.
Oh, yeah, and obviously the situation overall, like I remember when I saw the update, it absolutely floored me that, like, oh, wow, this is happening. Because I think, not necessarily with sporting events, but because I listen to shows based in Miami, like a lot of stuff has been going down in Miami as of late with some of the violence occurring there. So to hear that this happened was, it hurt to see. But to hear that everyone was okay in the stadium, that, injuries were kept, I think, as minimal as possible considering what the situation was. And like you said, like the athletes stepping in, making sure that people were safe, making sure that people were as comfortable as you can be in that kind of situation. Like it for what it was, the fact that it ends up with these kinds of results, like you'll take that considering everything. So we're of course happy that people are okay and that those that did have some injuries are doing better through it all, because obviously in these kinds of situations, like we said, it can get pretty bad. But for everyone pitching in together like that, that's stuff that you want to see, and we're very glad that the situation panned out this way, of course. So of course, moving on from the bit somber start, but with some good news at the end. Let's bring up the power of positivity back onto the show. And of course, like you mentioned at the top, James, the NHL offseason is here, and how quickly. James, it feels like just yesterday. It feels like just yesterday I was getting excited for the Seattle Kraken were eventually going to come into the league. And Lordy knows, just a couple days from now, about 48 hours from now, because the expansion draft will be at 8 p.m. start time, I believe. The expansion draft 2021, the Seattle Kraken are coming into the league. And James, of course, I've been talking about it. I've gotten a lot of the guys at the network interested in this stuff. Some of the guys actually are thinking about becoming Seattle Kraken fan. What are you, from a general fan perspective, like, what are you looking for to happen on Wednesday? Because this is, I've spoken about this with people. When you think of expansions in sports recently, correct me if I'm wrong, it's been quite a while since a Major League Baseball team was recently expanded. It's been more than a while for that. Basketball, the last expansion team was back in the early 2000s. And same with the NFL, with the Texans back in, I think, 2004. And I think around the same time, probably a year earlier, the Charlotte Bobcats, in their return to Charlotte a couple of years before that, within that time frame. So it's been a long time, since there was expansions, and then the NHL has one with Vegas and a couple of years back, and now one here with Seattle. So, I mean, you technically, because you became a Vegas Golden Knight fan, you saw the expansion draft, but as a general hockey fan, as you're learning here, and I'm very proud of the learning you've been doing, what are you looking forward to happening this upcoming Wednesday?
Just real quick, Jurg, I gotta give you a shout out. I'm trying to fact check you here on these last expansion teams. That Charlotte Bobcats Hornets one, right on the money. I gotta check the NFL one, but you probably got that one too. You've been killing it. That's it. Look at this. Look at the genius we have here on the Off the Ball Network. But what I'm really looking forward to, Jurg, is you kind of hope what happens in Seattle ends up what happened in Vegas ends up happening in Seattle. You hope they have a great draft and they just have a good front office to build off. And from what I'm understanding, the little research I've done on Seattle, it seems like they're started off on the right foot with how they're building this. So hopefully, they can work on what they built off in the front office and who they signed. But realistically, this is the base. It's either you're going to be a really bad team for God knows how long to come, because as you told me, Jurg, and I've learned, rebuilding in the NHL takes years and years and years to build, as you can see from the New Jersey Devils, who have like 6 first-round picks. 6 number 1 picks, and like they're still ass. But either way, doesn't matter. So you got to really, if you're not like the Vegas Knights and you're not at the top, you hope you're somewhere in the middle, because you just want to have a good building block to start off with.
No, you definitely do. I think when it comes to this draft, I'm hoping for a similar thing to happen. Just in my personal opinion, it'd be awesome if the Seattle Kraken were to quickly become a pretty good team in this league. Now, will they become a playoff team is a whole different question entirely, and it's all going to depend on who they draft, how they draft, and all in all. But I'm excited. Just another expansion draft so soon after the Vegas one. That has me giddy. I want Seattle to do good. And honestly, when you look at the names that are available here, James, there are high chances that the Seattle Kraken are going to have a relatively solid expansion draft when you look at some of the names available on all sides of things. You think of defensively, Mark Giordano was not protected by the Calgary Flames. Now, I'll get to him in just a moment here. But other solid defensemen such as Will Butcher, Vince Dunn, shockingly, when it comes to the St. Louis Blues. Travis Dermott's a solid defenseman for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But Brendan Dillon, a good foundational piece for the Washington Capitals. You have solid veterans there, and then the forward core from, again, just solid enough players in a Jonas Donskoy to star caliber players who have had success in the past, like a Jonathan Drouin and a Matt Duchene, to borderline superstars or pure superstars, Jordan Eberle, James Van Riemsdyk, Jacob Voracek, and Vladimir Tarasenko. And of course, the Tampa Bay Lightning have a good amount of forwards that they allowed to not be protected, because they actually went with the way of 4 defensemen to be protected instead of 3 with 7 forwards, which was an interesting move, I got to say. But all in all, there's a lot of potential here for Seattle to take advantage. And of course, how can I not mention goaltending? I'm sure, James, you want to bring this up because I think you wanted it a little bit clarified, but the Montreal Canadiens allowing Carey Price to not be protected. Now, James, I definitely know you have a question about it, so just like form to me, like what was your reaction when you saw that?
I didn't understand it. You know me, Jurg. I leaned straight to you because it just doesn't make sense. This guy literally carried the Canadiens to a Stanley Cup final. Unfortunately, they got blown out, but hey, he did what he could do. It was up to the rest of the team. So if you could explain to me and the other casual fans here and that what the NHL, like, why wouldn't they protect Carey Price? And also, how many of your players can you protect in this NHL draft? Because to my knowledge, you're only protecting like 20% of your team. Everybody else is up for grabs, which is kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it.
So specifically with the rules, so teams had to submit a protection list this past weekend, and the protection list had to be formed one of two ways. Either you have to protect 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and 1 goalie, or any combination of 8 skaters. So it could have been like, 5 forwards, only 3 defensemen if you didn't want to waste the other 2 slots. Or it could have been, like we saw, like I mentioned with Tampa, 4 defensemen that they wanted to protect, so they went with the second option. Or, weirdly enough, Nashville, they protected 5 defensemen and only 3 forwards and 1 goalie. So it was very, very strange to see there. Now, why Montreal left Carey Price unprotected? Here is the idea behind it. The idea is the fact that Montreal has struggled for the last 5 or so years to get a proper backup to Carey Price. And had they protected Price, it would have left Jake Allen wide open in the draft to be picked up. And Jake Allen, who's on a 2-year deal, that's about $2.5 million or so per year in the cap hit, maybe like 2.75, give or take. That's a valuable contract. And Jake Allen is a former starter. He's proven he could play in this league. With Seattle already picking up Chris Driedger this past weekend, if they had decided, hey, we're going to take Jake Allen here, that would have been an issue for Montreal because they spent so much time looking for that backup. To lose that person so quickly, that would have been bad. So that's why they didn't protect Carey Price. And in part because they believe that Seattle will be turned off by the Carey Price contract because it's $10 million per year cap hit, and I think 5 years left. And also the fact that Carey Price is getting a surgery relatively soon. I think if it wasn't today, probably tomorrow, like within the next 48 to 96 hours, some sort of timeline like that, Carey Price is going to be getting surgery. So that's ultimately why they did it. And that was a pretty similar mindset for quite a few teams. I mentioned Mark Giordano. A lot of the Calgary Flames have been in discussions with Seattle, like what will it take for them to not select Giordano in this expansion draft? Because here's the fun part, James. When it comes to the expansion draft, you don't need to, it's not just the team is selecting from the player pools. The Kraken, just like Vegas did, just like your Golden Knights did, James, they're going to work out side deals with these teams like, hey, we don't want you to select this specific player, so let's make a separate trade. We're going to give you a little something to select this player. It can end up being solid, where for Tampa Bay in the 2017 expansion draft, they were able to unload the Jason Garrison contract, or it could be really bad for the Florida Panthers, where they ended up, they wanted Vegas to end up, I forget who they want to protect, but essentially Vegas ended up getting Riley Smith, and they ended up picking Jonathan Marchessault to do the Panthers a favor. And both those guys end up being like key pieces for Vegas in year 1 going to the Stanley Cup final. So it didn't work out for you there, Florida. So really that's why Montreal is hoping that they're scared off, or they're going to hope to work out a side deal, which a lot of these teams are going to work on. Funny enough, the Tampa Bay Lightning, they're trying to work to see if they can convince Vegas to take on one of the bad contracts that they allowed to be unprotected. In fact, they're trying to do that with a lot of teams. They're trying to, of the unprotected players Tampa Bay has let up, they're trying to trade at least 2 of those guys minimum. So that's the reason why.
So aside from all these trades, what is like the strategy that Seattle should be going in for? Because, explain to us how the cap works and all that, because I understand, like you just said, the contracts are a little scary for people to pick up. So how should they work with this expansion draft? Should they work out all these side deals to make it work out for them better? Should they just go for best players available and just blow up the cap? What's the really ideal thing to do? Like what's the blueprint that the Vegas Knights basically laid out for Seattle here?
Well, the blueprint is you're going to want a combination of, you're going to want to put together a pretty good NHL ready roster, but you're also going to want to take a couple of, players that you're going to need to put in the minors, because you're taking from every single team in this draft except for Vegas. So by doing so for Seattle, you're taking 30 players here, and you got to take at least 14 forwards, 9 defensemen, and 3 goalies. So that's a lot that you need to take on. So when it comes to that, and with the salary cap, I don't believe it's moving at all this season. So I believe the salary cap limit is $81.5 million. Like you need to play the smart game here. Now, obviously, you need to meet the cap limit. There is a minimum cap limit that every single team must do. And for Seattle, the cap value that they intake in the expansion draft must be equal to 60 to 100% of last season's upper limit. So essentially, they need to meet the minimum and go above it. So if you're Seattle, it's really a case-by-case basis. Are you going to take, in some cases, you're going to take a player with some pretty good salary on them because you need to meet that cap floor. But at the same time, if there's a pretty good player here that's on a decently valued contract, you're going to take that as well. So it really all depends. Like I said, with Carey Price, the thing is that he's got 5 or 6 years left. He's going to be he's going to be up there in age when it comes to his contract being over. He'll be almost 40 when that contract comes to an end. And obviously, Montreal's not going to doesn't think of trading him. But if you're Seattle, you don't have the loyalty to picking him like Montreal does. Like Montreal took him, groomed him, etc. They've seen him grow. Seattle doesn't have that. So if in 2 years Seattle has buyer's remorse, you can't really move $10 million of salary cap space. That's not easy to do in the NHL. So the plan Vegas essentially set, in some cases, just pick a player on a team that you like. But in other cases, have the teams work out these deals because you could get another forward from them, a defenseman. You could get some picks, which Vegas took advantage of early. I think in their first draft, they ended up having 2 first-round draft picks in that initial year. And I think in one of the following years, they had like 2 seconds. So it's all these various things that you could do to get a high number of picks. And I think that's kind of what the strategy Seattle's going to be going with here. Get the players that you want, get the players that are going to try to fit Coach Dave Hackstall's plan as best as he's laying out. But if you get the chance to go for some draft picks, like I think Tampa Bay is a team that is going to work out a deal with Vegas here. I think Tampa Bay is going to try to convince them to take either Killorn, Johnson, or Yanni Gourde. Preferably for Tampa Bay's Johnson or Killorn, but probably it will end up being Yanni Gourde because of the talent. And they're probably going to have to give up like a future second round pick in that deal, like to convince them, like, hey, can you take him or something like that. So it's a whole process. But Seattle, like you said, Vegas has laid out the template. It's up to Seattle to try to do it their own way.
I think the coolest thing about this whole expansion draft is like Seattle Kraken is going to have Bobby Wagner popping up. Marshawn Lynch is going to be there saying you got to protect your chickens. You're going to have Seattle outfielder Kyle Lewis. He won Rookie of the Year last year. They're going to have Gary Payton, Sean Kemp. That's a whole party right there. It's about to be super lit to be a Seattle Kraken fan. You know me, Jurg. Them jerseys, forget it. Those things are clean. You wear those with some Carolina blue Jordans. I don't even like sneakers. I know that would look fresh. Like, I can't wait for this, man. I'm actually excited. I'm actually going to watch it because although I am a Vegas Knight fan and I became a fan the year that they, first originated and whatnot, I didn't watch the expansion draft. I just, went over it on Twitter. I wasn't that interested. But now I'm going to tune in wherever it is, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN Ocho, and it's about to be a good time. You're going to see Marshawn Lynch. That's it. That's all I need. He's just showing himself.
So it will be on ESPN2, just so people know. But also, I mean, you're definitely going to be watching this because Seattle's going to be in the Pacific Division, James. So they're going to be competing with Vegas. So you're not just going to get a review from me of the expansion draft next week. You're going to get some of Bars' takes on it because he's probably going to hope that Seattle makes a mistake here or there because it's like, they're competing with your Golden Knights, Bars. But they're not just doing the expansion draft. Seattle has the number 2 overall pick in this week's entry draft as well. And again, it's draft season, of course. Off the Ball Network, we predominantly cover basketball, and the NBA draft is coming up. Cracking up. But the beauty of it all, the entry draft is later on this week as well. The Kraken have the number 2 overall pick in games. Ain't it a beauty? The fact that you're going to pick up your roster, majority of it this upcoming Wednesday, but then just a couple days later, you're going to pick one of the key pieces of your franchise going forward. You're going to make the first ever pick in Kraken history. And I know a lot of people are excited about that.
I mean, man, I can't imagine. It's like fantasy football season. And when you're like 2 leagues, you have your practice one, it's like the whatever. And then you got the second draft and you're like, I'm going to kill it. So, it's like, it's Hanukkah and Christmas put together. It's 8 days of Christmas, basically. It's the greatest time to ever be alive. But speaking of the greatest time to ever be alive, Jurg, let's speak. It's always a great time whenever we have a guest, wouldn't you say? So I think we should introduce our guest.
We got a good one. We have a good one this week.
We got a very special guest. As you mentioned earlier, Jurg, it's a close friend of mine. He has 8 years of experience in the PT field. He's attended several conferences on baseball injuries and mechanics. He's been studying hands-on workshop. He's done lectures in theory and concepts. He treats patients of all ages. He treats athletes from young to older, and he even treats geriatrics. I had to Google what this meant, Jurg, as you know, before the show, because I'm not that smartest guy. I know a lot of sports, but I don't know the dictionary too well. That means old people. And old people actually have worse injuries than healthy athletes do, because they basically suffer the same injuries as athletes, because you got your hip replacements, you got your bad knees. He's going to get all into it. I'm not the professional here. But aside from all that, he's also currently the starting second baseman of the Bergen Black Sox in the NJABL. He's my close friend once again. That's Dr. John Andrew Lopez.
Thank you for guys bringing me on. It's a pleasure.
How you doing, bud? How you doing?
We're doing all right. I love the page in Dr. Lopez. That's great. That's awesome, man. Get ready to get going here. Love it.
Came up with it last second. I came up with it last second.
Hey, that works every time, man. I get that more than you think.
So just so the fans know, man, me and Dr. Lopez, we've actually been working on this for quite some time, actually. We've been trying to get you on the show for a minute, and he's a busy man, but thankfully he's been able to carve us out some time today. So without further ado, Dr.
We're
Lopez.
very, very thankful, by the way. Very thankful that you're able to make time in your schedule.
No, absolutely. Awesome. I mean, I see the thing that you guys are doing here. I love the podcast. It's going great. And I definitely wanted to get on and speak some injuries. So when, James came to me, he was like, listen, man, I want you to talk some injuries. You're free Monday night. I mean, especially when we're talking about athletes. I love that. And I'm always here to try to, educate the masses and try to see what we're looking at in terms of some of these football and baseball players that we're going to be talking about today. So hoping to give, your listeners some good insight onto what they could expect, especially if they're fans of these players or the teams, and kind of going forward and see what we got here today.
For sure. So, but before we get into the players, Jurg, I believe you had a question you wanted to ask related to this past week. We saw, not even, was it yesterday, 2 days ago? I don't know, man. I'm crazy. But we had game 5 of the finals, game five of the finals, and the Bucks, surprising with that come around craziness. Just, Chris Paul, he's been looking god awful. It's actually very sad because I wanted to see him win a ring. It's not looking like he is going to win a ring. But Jurg, I believe you had a question regarding something about injuries in the NBA.
Oh, so just generally speaking, so Dr. Lopez, something that I've been talking with James and my other friends about is the fact that, why are we seeing so many injuries in these playoffs? Like it was a stat that I heard earlier, and it's even gone more so since, that in this year's playoffs, I think it's 11 All-Stars from this past season have missed at least a game due to injuries in these specific playoffs. The previous record prior to that was 6. And I think this is putting, more of a focus on it, of just how much these guys are putting their bodies through because of not just more compacted season, because they need to get the timelines ready because the Olympics are coming soon, but also from finishing off last season. And I was pointing this out to James that if you look at some of the teams that really struggle with the injuries, it's the teams that went deep, like the Lakers, both LeBron and AD, Miami with their issues, Boston. So, can you just kind of put into the context of people, like, how much this wear and tear built up on these guys and how we saw it, in full effect in these playoffs?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is, the first thing, it was probably the shortest, I believe, offseason in history when it came to, the NBA for some of these teams coming out of the bubble, being a kind of season carry on for so long, with everything with COVID. And now, they jump right back into a season a few months later. I think the importance to speak to that and why there's so many injuries now when it comes to the playoffs is the fact that it's the wear and tear and not having an off season. The biggest thing that, I preach to athletes and things like that is you need time away from your sport. You need time to let your body heal, to do things that are not sports specific and just get your body moving in other ways. And I think that because they went into such a shortened off season and then going right into playing another season, they really didn't let their bodies rest. And a lot of the injuries that you're seeing are more strains. You're seeing a lot of ankle sprains, stuff with the knee, with ACL, MCLs, different strains like that. And the reason you're seeing that is because of the fact that there is no rest. You can't speak to importance. I can't speak to how important that is, only because of the fact that, rest, letting your body regenerate, keeping away from the sport. There's an important facet of that I think that you're seeing now, that, how could these elite athletes be getting injured like this? And there's a clear reason. I mean, we see that, even in my world, when I see a lot of the high school athletes, they've been getting the same thing. They haven't had a season. And then, for example, like this spring, you were having some of my athletes that were playing football in the spring up in Rockland County because they, didn't play in the fall. And so you're seeing a lot of injuries just not being in the right season, not being in the right timeline. They couldn't be with their teams, and it's kind of translating over into the pros where you're seeing that it's almost like too much, and they're kind of getting, same thing that we'll probably start getting into with football as well. It's just that not having that full off season to rest and develop. And you're seeing that with some of the other teams that had some full rest, that are, they're healthier going into the playoffs, deeper into the playoff run. And so, yeah, I think that the biggest thing is just not having an off season.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Doc, because I feel like we could do kind of a Mythbusters here, because you had a lot of people when the Nets were getting injured during the playoff series. Everyone started saying, oh, well, they're getting injured because they barely played any games this season. All this load management, since they only played like 10 games in the regular season, their body wasn't ready for the playoffs. And then you have people who are saying in the NFL, for example, due to the shortened offseason, people are getting hurt because they're not doing anything either. So is there a perfect mix, basically? Is there a perfect balance where it's, if you're not doing any like regular season games, it'll lead to injury, but if you're doing too much in the off season or playing too many minutes in the regular season, that's leading to injury as well? What would be the perfect balance for these athletes, essentially?
Yeah, I think when it comes to these kinds of injuries and just looking at just the overall balance, I think, one of the things you also have to look at is the player-specific injury history. We'll get into it, but I don't really believe there's too much things that's called injury prone, but you can't ignore the injury history of some of these players. And I think that brings into a different factor when a lot of these players are dealing with previous injuries that they're trying to get over as they're actively playing. That's a big thing. Specifically talking on the Nets, again, you got 3 elite players there that, to be honest, I don't feel they needed to be playing together, as much during the regular season just because of how good they were. But then, you look at some of the injuries that they were dealing with. Kyrie dealing with stuff with the ankle. Harden was dealing with the hamstring. KD was coming off the Achilles. These are all injuries that can nag and can progress throughout the season and just be with you. You kind of just that nagging injury that you always have. And so that's kind of tying into the fact that not having that full off season, that you are now shortening the time period in which you are rehabbing, and now you're trying to rehab as you're playing. And as we know, that never really goes hand in hand. You really got to try to do one or the other, especially when it comes to some of these more significant injuries. So I definitely think there is the sweet spot of just being able to, play your season and try to stay healthy, when you start the season. And then when you do get these nagging injuries, you got to try to find a sweet spot. Obviously, again, some of these teams, you're needed as a player. You know what I mean? You got to get out there on the floor just for, playoff runs or different things like that. But in the general sense, you do want to make sure that a lot of these nagging strains are taken care of. And you really saw that with the Nets, where they just had these, they never really got it right. They kind of had all these aches and pains, and, some games they were all 3 are playing together, some 2, sometimes 1. And I think that really kind of was a bad mixture in terms of their specific team structure. Based off their injury history, the big 3 we're talking here. But for the most part, yeah, I would. You want to make sure, like I said, you get that good off season, you get rest, you get time away from your sport, and then you pick it back up when preseason begins.
Love to hear it. But enough basketball. Let's get straight into the bunts, because we are a baseball and hockey show.
Let's do it.
We have to talk about, honestly, in my opinion, one of the most devastating injuries in the league, due to the fact that this guy he's a stud, rising star. If he's not the best player in the league, he's number 2. If he's not number 2, he's number 3. But regardless, we're talking about the one, the only Mr. Ronald Acuna Jr. And Doc, you mentioned how nagging injuries and how people play through injury. And essentially, Ronald Acuna, he had a lot of little nagging injuries throughout the season. If you have him in fantasy, you kind of were upset if you took him at 1 because of these nagging injuries. He wasn't playing consistently, and even if he wasn't playing consistently, he was still killing it. So imagine the MVP year he would have had if we had a healthy Ronald Acuna. But as we know, he tore his ACL. Could it have been the nagging injuries that you mentioned exactly? Because the catch, if you saw the video, it wasn't that crazy of a catch. It looked like a simple little jump, and then he tumbled to the floor. You wouldn't even known he was hurt if he wasn't on the floor crying. So what could have led to something like this?
I think the biggest thing that you saw when it came, and I kind of rewatched the video before coming on here just to kind of see how the mechanism of injury, it's really, to be honest, a freak injury when it comes to the game of baseball. You don't really see a ton of pure to ACL tears in baseball, simply for the fact that your body doesn't have to, the knee doesn't have to rotate as much in baseball in terms of when you're, playing, in the field or even batting. So I think that I'm not too sure that the nagging injuries was a specific reason why he got that ACL tear. I think if you go back and look at the video and slow it down, and kind of the way that I'm looking at it is that he really took a odd fall there on that knee. The way that the knee, he landed on that single leg and it kind of had that twisting motion. And so when you look at it and you really slow it down, you really say, okay, wow, that actually does not look good. Obviously I'm looking at it through a different lens. So I kind of figured that there was definitely something going on there. Now, looking at the video, I didn't think that he tore the ACL. I thought that it was probably a really, really bad sprain. But it turns out that, he tore the ACL. And, to be honest, at this point, he's just out for the season. He probably got surgery, I would think probably recently. He got the tear was on July 10th. And so, he probably got a surgery maybe a few days later if it was just the ACL that was affected, which all reports really seem to be that way. So, you're looking at a 9-month timeline in terms of returning back to performance. So there's a difference, and we'll get into that with the football players we talk about, but there's a difference between returning to rehab versus returning to sport versus returning to performance. So really what you're looking at in terms of, he'll be ready for the start of the season. But again, it's going to take him about a couple of months into the season to really work on his just getting back to what he was. Now, like I said, the data on baseball, again, not a lot of ACL tears. So, being that, he's young, that's a big factor in him being able to recover from this injury. So I do feel that, he'll be ready for the season. It'll take him a little bit, through spring training, through April, and just to get his body right and just get used to that knee, especially playing the outfield and being able to pivot off that leg, with fly balls and stuff. But yeah, it's one of those freak things that you don't normally see on that. But we're gonna have to say goodbye to him for this season. But he'll rest and rehab throughout the year, and then he'll be ready to go when it comes to 2022 season.
Just a quick last question on Ronald. Is this something that's going to affect, because he's known as basically a 5-tool player? He has the power, he has the defense, he has the average, and one of the most important things about him is he steals bases. He's one of the few people still in the league that steals a lot of bases. Is this something that's going to affect that part of his game coming in the future?
I think that he'll definitely be working on those things. One of the things, the biggest thing with the ACL is just your ability to plant the foot, pivot, and run in certain directions. So if I were to say the biggest thing that he would be working on, it's actually his directional mobility when it comes to playing the outfield. Like I said, fly balls, line drives can be hit anywhere. So his ability to stop on a dime on the leg, turn the body to be able to catch fly balls, even to plant the leg to throw the baseball, turning the bases as he's running them. Those are all things that he's going to be working on in terms, even the hitting too. His ability to plant the leg and pivot his body over the knees is going to be something that he'll be working on. But it's definitely going to be something that, you got to keep in mind, see how his rehab goes throughout the, throughout the year here and indicating on, we'll see what reports are going to be going on, when it comes to spring training next year. But the biggest thing will be his ability to pivot and push off the leg that we're really concerned with mostly.
Damn, sounding like I might have to drop him in my fantasy league. But
I wonder who James was referring to first overall.
It sounded pretty personal there. So.
I'm still in first. It's all right.
There you go.
But we lost one bright star, but we have another bright star who's actually going to be returning from injury, Doc, and that's Eloy Jimenez. He actually suffered from, the information I have here, is a ruptured pectoral tendon. From what I believe, that's something to do with your chest. You're the professional here, Doc. Please explain it to us in some simpler terms.
So we go from one freak injury to another here with Eloy Jimenez. So doing some research on him, he basically did this in spring training, trying to rob a home run. And if you can kind of envision the mechanism of injury, he's going with his non-throwing hand, catching the ball, coming over the fence. And as he comes over the fence, the pressure of the wall, literally of the fence, as he's going down into it and then tries to come off of the fence, is what put pressure onto that tendon and tore that tendon. Again, freakish injury, not something that you see in baseball players, something more that you see in the lifting world with, somebody doing a 500-pound bench press and tearing their pec tendon. The good thing is that it is his non-throwing hand. So if anything, at least in terms of, he's not going to have to work on throwing mechanics or things like that. It's really one of those things that he probably, just depending on the type of pressure and force that he put on that, he was probably a little bit from like a pec strain to a pec tear, which a strain would put him, maybe a month or so that he's missing, maybe just April he's missing. But because he got that pec tear, now he's going to, he's out for 5-6 months. So it puts him on track for sometime around late August, early September, where he'll start to, at this point now, being that it's getting towards August, he's probably at least starting to do some very light baseball activities. Like I said, he can probably still throw with the hand and still kind of get things going. At this point, he's out of a sling or anything like that. It's more so him just kind of getting back to his mechanics, because again, it's his non-throwing hand, so his swing mechanics, the finish on his swing, even his ability to move his hand around as he's tracking fly balls. So he'll have to do a lot of shoulder strengthening just to make sure that pec is, when they reattach it, to make sure that is secure. So, at this point now, he's getting to late stage rehab. Last month, he's probably focusing more on getting back to baseball. Like I said, kind of getting towards that return to sport / return to performance. So it's one of those things that he'll be back in September, early September, probably ready to go. Again, one of those things that it'll take him a little bit just to get used to game speed. That's a big thing for not only pretty much any, major sport here, is just not only getting back to playing your sport, but playing at that game speed. Because as we know, in the pros, that it moves quick, you get up there and it's ready to go, so it's one of those things, that he'll be back, but it'll take him a little bit to get used to.
So from the reports I've been reading lately, it seems like they're actually looking to have him come in as DH. Is this something that if they bring him in, let's say you're saying early September, let's say they bring him early August, is this something that could have a reoccurring injury rate? Is that something that they should keep an eye open for? Because, this isn't a guy you really want to get hurt. He's essentially was the next Ronald Acuna when he first came into the league.
Right.
Is this something that they're being kind of done with, since they're currently first in their division and they actually have a great team, although they've been injured all season?
Yeah, I think this is the type of injury, because it's such a freakish type of injury, that you got to be more on the conservative side when it comes to this. Like I said, it's not going to be something that he should be put in positions specifically that will re-tear his pec. But what you have to look at is the fact that inflammation and scar tissue can still be developing or still be there. It definitely actually still will be there within the shoulder. And so that can create a little bit of recurring strains if you try to bring him back a little too early. I do think that he'll probably resume hitting before he gets back into the field, just because of certain things of, again, keeping the arm up, being able to kind of, running with that also can affect the shoulder too. So I think that he'll get back to doing more hitting first, just kind of seeing what it feels like to have a bat in his hands and swing. That's going to be the first thing. And like I said, since it's not his throwing hand, he's probably already been throwing in some capacity just to keep himself loose, to keep going. But yeah, it's definitely one of those weird ones that can have recurrent strains if it's not fully healed. So, if I were them, I would definitely suggest, just based off where they are in terms of their standings and stuff like that, be a little bit more conservative and try to eye that probably early September. I probably wouldn't try to bring him back a whole month earlier, based off the fact that these pec tears have a specific protocol that you want to really follow. And so you want to make sure you complete that before you kind of get him back to that return to play on the field.
It wouldn't surprise me if the White Sox tried doing something dumb like that, though. History catches up at some point.
Doc, real quick, just on the topic of injuries happening again. I forget when exactly it happened to him, but Mike Soroka of the Atlanta Braves, he retore his Achilles earlier on. And can you just kind of go into the idea of, like, when we're talking about being careful with Eloy Jimenez and making sure, like, they don't put him in any position, like, how I don't want to base it off of luck. I know there's science behind it, but, like, how unlucky were the Braves and Soroka when it came to his Achilles re-tearing on itself?
Yeah, that's one of those things that, those where the Achilles tears, they usually start off with a strain. right? So you usually have some sort of calf strain that's very nagging, and then you either come back too early, as we'll talk about a little bit with with another player here, but if they come back too early from these calf strains and they're not fully healed, these are one of the most nagging injuries, worse than knee strains, worse than hip. The the calf is really one of those that kind of nag a lot. And so if you don't really first rehab that injury fully, then now what you get is then more pressure and more force put through a tendon that's strained, and now you get a tear. Now, going back to his re-tear, again, part of that is just the mechanism of injury. It could have been the way that he just planted his foot and pushed off, and it just wasn't strong in that one specific direction that he was going in. And so that's like what you're seeing with, like, you were feared for KD. He was doing the same, could have had a re-tear with him, especially in basketball, which is much more of a running sport and push-off sport. And so what you really, part of it is unlucky. He re-tore his Achilles, which the data, on that doesn't, depending on, for high-level athletes, doesn't really suggest a lot of re-tear, depending on, again, sport, age, injury history. Those are all things that you got to factor in, just kind of talking in injuries in general. But yeah, it's one of those things that it's one of those freak things that, again, he could have been just the position that he did it and kind of retore it there. But yeah, there's some data that some players can re-tear it, but it's more so of a unlucky position, so to speak, in terms of his foot and ankle.
So you mentioned one MVP in KD who had a calf strain. We're going to go ahead and mention another MVP, which is kind of crazy if you really think about it. This year, the LA Angels have 2 MVPs on their team. It's kind of mind-blowing. It's Shohei Ohtani, but now they have their returning guy, and if not the best player, it's Ronald Acuna or this guy, and Michael Trout, and he suffered the calf strain that we were mentioning earlier. You kind of did explain it right there with Mike Soroka, the danger's in if they bring him in. But aside from that, how is this calf strain kind of different than your average calf strain, aside from the side that it's, the greatest player in all of baseball?
Yeah. So let's talk about Mike Trout here a little bit. So significant calf strain on May 17th, from what I looked up. And so again, this is more so you talk about different types of grades. So he's probably on that grade 2 zone, grade 3 being that tear, 3 and 4 being that tear, grade 1 being more mild. Again, lingering type of injury. For a calf strain, the typical timeline you're looking at is 6 to 8 weeks in terms of returning back. So again, should put him on track for some time, maybe next week, maybe in the next 2 weeks. You will hope, that you hope that timeline, the 8-week timeline, does put him to the end of July, early August. Now, the big thing with this is that, this kind of just speaks to the fact that, professional players have, access to more, stronger medical care. For a lack of a better term, and so
they got money.
Correct. And what they can do, and what has been done in the past, when it specifically actually with these calf strains, is just regenerative medicine. So we're talking about PRP injections. We're talking about bone marrow injections. Those kinds of things can help to increase the tensile strength of the calf and the tendon. And that's basically what they're used for. They're used to try to accelerate the timeline a little bit. But again, with a player like that, you're talking like a 5'2" player who's fast. He's running, he can hit, but he can move. And so the one thing that you don't want him to lose is his speed, right? And so that, that's a big component of what he brings to his own game, right? So, you got to make sure that this injury, especially when you're talking about investing this much money in one player, that's another big factor. The fact that they have this player for years, and we're talking years that they signed this player to, Trout. And so if you don't have, if you're not really making sure that timeline is completed, he's passing all of his functional tests to get back onto the field, then you're just doing a disservice for him. So, but knowing, any professional team, they're going to make sure that their star player that they've invested millions of dollars into is healthy. And so, they're going to make sure that this, strain kind of goes away. He's all right. He'll probably be playing some, minor league games just to get his game speed, get everything back up, and then he'll get back called up to the big, to the big leagues. At this point right now, he's probably at least been playing in some sort of capacity in the minors just to get his bearings and get moving. Again, something that you really, really want to make sure, because again, you don't want to fall down the track of the Mike Soroka where you're going to get into that tear. And again, then you're done for the year. And depending on when you get it in the year, if he gets it later this year, he's done for the rest of this year plus most of next year. So it's one of those things that, we're in July. The baseball season, still got the dog days of summer, still got to go through September and October. So there's a lot of baseball left to be played, and you want to make sure that your star player, aside from Ohtani, is there to play. So it's one of those things that they got to make sure that it's 100% before they get him back.
The 162 game regular season of baseball, you could kind of summarize as kind of like a war of attrition, where these guys are going through this entire season trying to stay as healthy as can be. And especially because like the superstars, they don't take a lot of games off. Like the least amount they'll usually play if they're healthy is like 155 games, 156. So definitely something to keep track with the Angels. And also kind of like for me, it really puts into perspective like Ohtani, what he's doing is pretty special right now, considering he's doing it on both ends, and he's been as healthy as he's been relatively so far in his career, aside from I think it was
right
when he got hurt. But speaking of wars of attrition, Doc, so we talk about a lot of baseball just now. Let's move on to a sport that really takes the idea of attrition into effect, and that's football.
That's right.
And I immediately, at least for myself, I don't know what James wanted to tackle first, but I want to tackle this part first. So Tom Brady trying to add to the legacy of TB12, and by the way, great great advertising material for his brand right there. Alleges that he that this past season, not just in the Super Bowl, but the entire season essentially, he played on a torn MCL, and I think I saw a report somewhere saying that maybe he had it back in New England. He just never. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm expecting him to say that he's had the torn MCL since the Atlanta Falcons Super Bowl. It wouldn't surprise me if he tried to say it. So
wouldn't surprise me either.
Yeah, right. So just based off of that, like, I don't want to necessarily. Well, I don't know if James wanted to. I don't want to question it, try to call him false, but like how likely is it for him to have gone through this in the entire year, so all 16 regular season games and the playoffs on it? Because like as a hockey fan, like I'm used to hearing guys at the very end of the playoffs when these reports come out, like very notably, I think it was back in 2013 or 14, Patrice Bergeron, he had like a cracked rib, a torn shoulder labrum, like he had a bunch of stuff. So like I can believe guys pushing through for a limited space of time, but my thing with the Brady thing, it's over a span of like 5-6 months.
Yeah, so here's the very, very interesting thing, and that I actually looked up when I was kind of seeing all these reports about Tom Brady. So here's the thing. He actually sprained that same MCL in 2019. Likely that was a grade 2 or a high grade 1. So already the mechanism of injury, and when we were talking about Acuna with his prior injuries, because this have led to the ACL injury, this, I believe, 100% led to his MCL tear. Now, talking about the MCL in general, it's one of the ligaments on the inside of your knee that just helps to stabilize as you're doing certain rotational movements and to help so that those knees don't, it's one of the ligaments that help that those knees not collapse inward, kind of prevents that. Now, the big thing is that you have to look at his position, but not only his position, but how he plays his position. He's a pocket passer. Basically, he's just an elite pocket passer. He stands back there. He's got a good line. He gets it out quickly. He's taking very minimal steps. If you actually kind of watch him drop back and do certain things, he doesn't use a lot of energy or does a lot of pivoting or running. He's not, going off for rushing for like 1,000 yards. He's not doing that, right? He's staying in the pocket and he's passing. Now, just to give you a perspective on how him versus other players. So other players that have torn their MCL, James Conner, Aaron Jones, Nick Chubb, right? What are the three what's the one thing that's in common with those three players? They're all running backs, right? They all need to be able to cut and pivot, which the MCL provides that stability for you to do that. In my opinion, Tom Brady could have played on this torn MCL all season. I mean, it's something that he already had the mechanism. It was already sprained, which means that it was probably torn. Some fibers were kind of fraying a little bit. And so, he may have taken a hit. He may have, done this. And basically what he does is he just plays with either a brace or he just fights through, depending on how the pain levels are. And so, again, from what I looked up, he underwent surgery in February. So, again, this is much less than an ACL. With an ACL, you're talking about 2 to 3 months. And before even the surgery, after the season, he's probably at least, his playing the season, he was strengthening the knee. Even while he was playing through pain, he was still kind of building the robustness of his knee and trying to make sure that it was, not going on unstable on him. But the big thing is that a couple of months, 2 to 3 months, in terms of getting back to at least recovery, much less than an ACL. And then, when you're looking at your return to performance, you're looking at around 6 to 8 months. So you figure he got surgery in February, that's puts him right on track for August, September, at least to, and all this time, as he's got the surgery, he's already been rehabbing, he's already been strengthening and doing all those things. He'll be on track to start the season. The way that he plays will not put too much demand on his knees. He's going to be even probably more cautious than he is now with the torn MCL that he got repaired. But, it's definitely one of those things that just based off how he plays, it won't be too much of a risk for him going forward, especially this season.
It's all that avocado ice cream. This keeps him young, man. I look over at Tom Brady right now. He's
guy's the plant man,
But you're speaking of the way Tom Brady plays, a player who has a little bit more movement but still plays in the pocket is the young and upcoming. Forget the old. Out with the old, in with the new. Talking about Joe Burrow over here. And he had a significant injury. I believe he not only tore his MCL, but he also tore his ACL and his LCL and his OPP and whatever else there is, So break it down for us, Doc. When can we expect Joe Burrow to come back? Are we expecting him beginning of the season, middle of the season? Should we not even expect him this season at all? If the Bengals are smart, hold him towards the end?
Yeah, so here's the big thing with him. He pretty much tore almost everything that you can tear in the knee. Reports ACL, MCL, and additional damage is what they kind of put it as. When they really talk about additional damage, they're probably talking about some cartilage or part of the meniscus that was involved in this tearing of the ACL and MCL. Did it in week 11. All right, so he got surgery soon from that point. His surgery was actually December 2nd, in which 9 months from that point puts him right to September. So when you're looking at that, he's probably not going to start the season 100%. Now, you look at Joe Burrow last year, and, he got comfortable. Once he got comfortable with the offense, and just the NFL game speed, you started to see him, get outside the pocket, start running a little bit more. You can probably not expect that in the beginning of the season, however. It's going to be one of those things where he's got to get his game speed back. And he's definitely there's going to be one of two things, right? He's either going to just be cautious and fearful, and that's more of a subconscious thing. And that's actually a big thing with athletes. When they get these kinds of traumatic injuries, especially if they've never had them before, there's a certain level of fear of getting hit. There's a certain level of fear of, leaking out in the pocket and, having that edge rusher coming in right downhill, running right at you, for that fear of just re-injuring the knee. So he's definitely going to be more cautious. The coaching staff will definitely cause him to be more cautious, try to draw up a lot more plays that are, getting the ball out of his hands quickly, getting the ball to the running back, getting the ball right out there in the slot, just making sure that he's just at least completing passes, getting comfortable with being in the pocket. As the season goes on, of course, he'll be continuing to strengthen the knee. He'll be more comfortable with, rushing. And so you'll see that a little bit towards the end of the season. Don't think he'll be too much of, a rusher in the beginning of the season. He's going to be more pocket passing, kind of like Brady-like, where he's going to just get his rhythm, get his timing back. Then eventually, he'll kind of start doing back what he was doing before he got injured last year, which is being a little bit of a rusher as well, adding that to his game.
So, another injury. It was just a god-awful injury season in the NFL.
Bad year for quarterbacks.
Literally.
That's for sure.
But another injury to another quarterback was Dakota Prescott of the Dallas Cowgirls, whatever. He had a really significant injury, though. If anyone remembers the video, his ankle literally was, that way.
It was bad. It was bad.
The complete opposite direction. And yet somehow, is he projected to be back sooner than Joe Burrow? What's the two differences between these two obviously significant injuries?
So the big difference, just speaking on the injury itself, you're looking at more with Joe Burrow, you're looking more soft tissue, right? Ligament injuries, some meniscus injuries. With Dak Prescott, however, you're looking at a bone issue. He legitimately fractured his ankle, but not only fractured the ankle, he dislocated it in the process. So it was pretty much a compound fracture, just compounding more so onto it. And so what you look at with the soft tissue injuries versus bone injuries is that bone is pretty straightforward in terms of timeline, right? So, really what you're looking at, the bone just has to heal, and then you just got to strengthen and you'll be good to go. Soft tissue injuries are a little different because of the fact that most of them, especially when it comes to the knee, are hugely important in terms of stabilizing the knee as you move. They're very dynamic stabilizers. But when the bone, for him specifically, he got what's called an ORIF. So it's basically what they do is they put the fracture, they put the ankle back where it's supposed to be, reduce it there, and then they pretty much fixate it. And that's what, he casted, everything like that, not putting weight on it for a little bit. Now, when it comes to his return, some of the stuff that I was looking at, sport-specific training starts 6 months post-surgery. That's what most of the data suggests with compound fractures of the ankle. And speaking of that 6 month time, literally of the day that his surgery, 6 months after the date of his surgery, he was at the Dallas training facility, which is a really good prognosis. It tells me that he's at least ready to begin some sort of sport-specific training, just kind of getting back into it, putting weight onto it, being able to pivot, being able to throw the ball. And a kind of interesting thing that I found back in 2015 in terms of athletes returning to sports following this kind of ankle fracture, 93% of them were competing in 6 to 12 months post-surgery. This was specifically looking at NFL players between 2004 and 2014 who required this same surgery. And so 86% of them return to game time action the following season. Obviously, that 86% can be skewed depending on when you got the injury in the course of the season. Obviously, later on in the season, you'll be playing, but it won't be at the beginning of the season. So data suggests that it's a great, a good prognosis for him to get back, especially that he was at the Dallas training facility exactly 6 months after his surgery. So for him, again, it's going to be something that I don't really have any doubts of him beginning the season. Now, again, it could be a little bit of that fear factor in terms of him really wanting to leak out of the pocket and start running. But for the most part, he should be good to go from a quarterback perspective. Throwing the ball, shouldn't really have any injuries. Obviously, it wasn't an upper body injury. He just needs to be able to make sure that he's able to plant off that foot, pivot, and do what he needs to do just to kind of play the quarterback.
You hear that, Cowboy fans? You got Dakota Prescott to be able to throw 5 touchdowns and still lose a game for next year.
It could be.
Now, Jurg, before we wrap up, got any final questions for the good doc over here?
I guess just a quick run through because he kind of mentioned it, and we've teased the people a little bit on it. But can you kind of talk about like the differences in what the athletes are rehabbing for when you talk about rehabbing to just initially get back and move again, and then compared to when they finally rehab to get back into their sport and the flow? Because like I always joke with just generally speaking, like we all say the joke. There's levels to this, but from what you said, like it's the first time I actually heard it where there's literally levels to the process of these guys rehabbing and getting back to playing again.
Yeah. So the big thing there's 3 timelines really that I look at when it comes to anybody coming off a surgery, whether, whatever the surgery is. It's return to rehab, return to sport, and then return to performance. And all those, depending on the surgery that you get, all have different timelines, right? So to speak on the first level, which is the return to rehab, that's when I see them. So I'm seeing them, post ACL repair, meniscus, rotator cuff, whatever the case is, that's when I'm seeing them first. The big thing in that phase is just to make sure, pain levels are going down, swelling's going down, a lot of the basic stuff, make sure they get their motion back to what they need and strengthening in a basic type of level as they're progressing through their rehab. Then the next step is really now return to sport. So in order to return to your sport, you have to clear everything from return to rehab. You got to pass all your tests. So one of the things, for example, when we look at ACL tears, I look at your ability to do a triple jump and what's that distance compared to your non-affected leg. Are we within 90%? Are we not within 90%? I like to use 90% because you really need your strength and your performance within 90% of your unaffected leg or arm or whatever the case is in order to just get back to doing sport-specific things. Now, sport-specific things can mean a whole bunch of stuff from, just getting a bat in your hand and swinging, just kind of doing some jogging and light cutting, with a football in your hand. Like you saw with Odell Beckham, he was catching passes on one hand off of the thing that was just throwing in passes. People were throwing passes, he's catching them off one hand. Those are more sport-specific type of things. So you get yourself used to what it's like to legitimately play your sport again on whatever it is that they repaired. That's the second step. So just getting back to just doing some kind of sports-specific activity. Now we get to return to performance. Now, return to performance is a little bit more fluid, right? Return to performance can mean, well, okay, we got, for example, Mike Trout getting back, in about a couple of weeks or so. All right, well, he now has progressed past his return to sport, but he's not yet at that return to performance phase, right? Because performance, you need to be able to play your sport for a little bit, get your bearings for the first week or so, 2 weeks, playing a few games, getting yourself, acclimated back to game speed. And then you're in that return to performance category. Now you have played for a little bit. You've played at increasing, maybe lower levels, minor leagues and things like that, just to get your bearings. Once you get to the big leagues, then now you're actually playing your sport real time, playing against players that are of your same, level. And so now you're really working more on your performance. You're getting back into all the things that you used to be able to do, and trying to make sure that you maintain and or improve those things.
Wow. That was, hey, Doc, you're the best. I'm just saying that right now. You are the best. You have literally opened, like, I'm sure a lot of people's eyes to how the process on this really goes over the last 40 minutes or so. That this has been phenomenal.
It's definitely one of those things that I want to make sure that people realize that, again, these athletes are also people. You know what I mean? They get injured too, just like we do. I see the same injuries that are happening in the pros in my office, and so it's one of those things that doesn't matter, age, activity level, how strong you are. Those things can happen to anybody, and so it kind of puts into perspective the fact that these guys are people. They're not just there, like obviously everybody gets, annoyed with the fantasy, right? They're like, how could you not play better for me? You're supposed to score, you're supposed to this and that, and people have these aches and strains, they're normal people too, man. So it's one of the things that, you got to put into perspective. And, being a PT has really opened my eyes to the fact that, again, I try to help people move better and move more efficiently. And that's the same thing that these athletes are doing. They're just doing it on a much higher level than the patients that I see in my office, which doesn't water down what I do, and it doesn't prop up what they do. It just means that, hey, everybody at some point may get injured, and you have to make sure that you put that into perspective and understand all these kind of different risks that could be associated with it. Just like this whole injury prone tag, right? It's not more so that certain players are injury prone. They just might be putting themselves in a position that, injury history does have a part to play in it. But to label somebody as injury prone is a little bit, I'm not too sure on that, just because of the fact that, again, a lot of data suggests that there's different, age groups that have different types of concerns with injuries. But anybody can get these kinds of injuries. That's the point that's really the closing point here.
Nah, you get paid millions. I'm naming you injury prone. I don't care.
That's right. I knew that was coming.
If I could get called injury prone back in high school and I don't get paid millions, so can you. But regardless, Doc, I want to thank you once again for coming. It's definitely the first time, but it certainly won't be the last time, because unfortunately, that's just part of sports. It's about the Bunts and Bruises. That's why it's called Bunts and Bruises. But regardless, Doc, thank you once again for honestly educating all of us. There's not many times there's another guy on the show that's smarter than Jurg, and we might have had his smarter Jurg. I have to hand the cap off.
Oh, I gladly. This man can gladly take that. That was absolutely phenomenal.
No, guys, I really thank you guys for having me on. It's one of those things, like I said, I really wanted to get on just to talk injuries. And anytime, I'll even start. Not a big hockey guy. Sorry, Jurg, I'm not a big hockey guy. But if, you guys were to tell me some stuff, hey, I want you to look up these players, I'm doing it. It's just my kind of field. I love getting into this, especially when it comes to the athletes, because you can see everything on a more of an elite level. And so, like I said, thank you guys for having me on. Can't wait to hop back on and talk some more injuries and talk just sports,
Oh, my
of course,
God.
Doc. Once again, thank you for hopping on. Is there anyone on Instagram that people can follow you if you want to start a following here? I heard the TikTok's a new thing for these physical therapists.
Yeah, definitely. You can follow my work account, which is Bardonia PT. That's up in New City, New York. That's really where we're putting more content in terms of injuries related, different type of exercises. So go give that a look. It's on Instagram and Facebook at Bardonia PT. So definitely take a look at that. You'll see myself on there. You'll see some of the other therapists kind of doing their thing. And we're just trying to bring information to the masses when it comes to rehab and getting healthier and moving better.
Thank you. Love to hear it, Doc. Once again, Doc, we're going to have you again. I'm going to send you the message. All right, man? Take care.
Absolutely. 100%. Take care, guys.
Jurg,
that was amazing.
You just got to love it.
He's amazing.
Gotta love it.
He's amazing.
I know. I only bring the best, Jurg.
My
Come
word.
on. I only bring the best.
You're right about that. You are right about that. Wow, that was amazing, James. But we're not done yet.
Of course. How can we got to finish it off? We haven't done it in a while, Jurg. We got to finish it with the best.
Ladies and gentlemen, the show moves on to its final act for this week's episode. The return of your favorite segment, as is mine, the How to Be a Fanatic segment, where me and Bars will go around every single team throughout the NHL and the MLB and give you 5 reasons, yes, count them, 5 reasons why you should be a fan of those teams. And what? Of course, James, you know, that outstanding talk that we just had on, I'm sure a lot of people, they're trying to pick up on, you know, what could this week be? You know, what are they going to mention Atlanta, or are they going to go with somebody else? No. What we are going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is because we start off the show with them, we're going to end the show with them. That's called, you know, bring it full circle, ladies and gentlemen. The Seattle teams in the MLB and now the NHL. I will give you right now 5 immediate reasons why you should already become a Seattle Kraken fan before they've even played a game. So, of course, number 1, the idea of being a fan from literally day one of an organization. You do not get that opportunity, you know, every so often. We said at the start of the show, it's been a long time since there have been expansion teams in all 4 sports leagues, aside from the NHL, of course, but even before Vegas, it was quite a while before then. So to be able to call yourself a fan from day one, literally, that's something you don't get a chance to. Just do it. You know, if you want a team, you don't want anyone to call you a bandwagoner. You don't want to be like James and switch your team every so often, depending on who's winning the cup.
Hey. I've always been a loyal Tampa Bay Lightning fan, all right, Jurg? Don't you doubt it. So
it was Vegas 2 months ago. So if you want to be a fan literally from day one, that's why you go with Seattle. Number 2, sticking with the theme of, you know, number ones here, the idea of every first time that Seattle goes through, you're going to get to experience the first ever captain that gets named. You get to see that happen for you. The first game that gets played when you watch it, or if you obviously you live in Seattle or you plan on traveling there, you go see it. Like all these little things you get to see, but the first playoff appearance, the first playoff win, first 50-win season, the first Stanley Cup appearance, all of that you get to experience first. Again, it's already one thing where it's being a fan from day one, but you get to be a part of literally the franchise's first and everything. That's special. That's something you cannot replicate that kind of feeling. So of course, again, let's keep on with the firsts. Number 3, the young players that are going to come into this team over the next few years. Of course, I talked about the expansion draft and the vets that this team's going to add. But like I said, Seattle has the number 2 overall pick in the upcoming draft. And they have a chance to get a really talented player at the number 2 pick, whoever it may be. There's guys like Owen Power, Matt Beniers. You know, I don't think they pick up number 2, but Dylan Gunther is a sniper in this draft. Mason McTavish is projected by many to be a top 6 caliber center. There's some very young, talented players, and whoever gets selected, again, first pick in franchise history, so yet another first for you, but you are potentially seeing like a future all-star depending on the player that you could select. So again, let's keep on at it with the first and the young talent. Like you're literally going to see your team grow in Seattle. Number 4, like, I mean, James said it. It's actually, no, we're going to save that for number 5. We're going to save the best for last. Number 4, this is a unique thing. This is a little fun fact here, James. The fact that the Seattle Kraken, they're one of the teams in the sport now, doesn't have an S at the end of the name. You know, I don't think this is more. It's not really a reason, but it's just to think about it. It's just a funny thing to be a fan of the team. I remember back in 2012 when the Thunder and Heat were in the finals, James. That was the first ever finals in NBA history.
That was a big thing. I remember that. That was
the first
huge.
finals in NBA history where both teams didn't have the letter S at the end of the team. It sounds hilariously funny, but it's also true. So hey, be unique, be a fan of the team that doesn't have the S at the end of it. I mean, it could work out for you. Tampa Bay Lightning, 2 Stanley Cups the last 2 years. No S there. It's working pretty good for them. And of course, the 5th and final reason, James said it before, for their first ever jerseys, the Seattle Kraken hit, you know, they scored a hat trick with it. They stood on their heads if they were goalies. They're amazing. Like James said, whatever kind of blue sneakers you want to put them with, they're going to look nice. Just oh my God, the NHL, like, they do jerseys right, man. And Seattle joining in the club, you guys are already welcome immediately with the jersey selection. So good job, boys. And that is 5 reasons why you should be a fan of the soon to officially have a roster Seattle Kraken.
We'll see how they do in this expansion draft, Jurg. Who knows? Maybe I'm a Kraken fan afterwards. But
It
without
wouldn't surprise
wasting,
me.
whoa. All right, you might have a point. But regardless, without wasting any more time, here we go. 5 reasons. Well, I tried my best to come up with 5 reasons to be a Seattle Mariners fan, which actually, it's not as bad as it seems. Reason number 1, first reason I had to call it off. You're doing better than a team that has 2 MVPs on it. You are currently 3 games ahead of the LA Angels. So it could be a lot worse. You know, you could have 2 MVPs and be god awful. And you're not even doing that bad. You're only 6 games back from the Astros and 2.5 games back from the A's, which are 2 very good organizations. You know, tough Nuggies, you're in the tough division, but you actually are going to figure it out because of reason number 2. You could potentially have one of the best outfields in the entire league with Mitch Haniger, who is just an all-star in himself this year and who actually is having a career year this year. But then you have to look at your center fielder and Kyle Lewis, who was the rookie of the year last year. And now you have the rising star who everyone, by all accounts, although he got sent back to the minors earlier this year, they brought him back after the All-Star break, and that's Jarrett Kalenic, who everyone says is another one of these young guys who has all 5 tools to be a stud, which is why the reason the Mets are going to lose the trade. But hey, so far it looks like we're doing great. Regardless, reason number 3 is actually you are the last team to have a perfect game in the books when King Felix himself was the one to throw it. It's a nice little thing, you know, hold on to your belt for yourself. The number 4 reason to be a Seattle Mariners fan is they got cool hats, man. That S, super dope. The symbol, the jersey, everything about it, you know? Say what you want. It might not be the best jersey in the league, but it is still a pretty dope jersey, especially if you get that teal one, too. You know what I'm talking about, Jerry? The throwback one with the Ichiro on it. Ichiro made that. Oh, you get an Ichiro vintage jersey? Forget about it. It's going to be the coolest thing ever. And the number 5 reason why you should be a Seattle Mariner fan is it's looking on the up and up, man. You got a young roster to build on. Aside from those 3 guys I mentioned, you got Daniel Vogelback, and you got your pitching's iffy, but that's all right. You can make a few moves here, especially in this pending trade deadline. You make a couple moves here and become buyers. Your team all of a sudden could pass those A's, make a push for that second wild card. If the Seattle Mariners make a playoff push this season, Jurg, I was first one to say it here. Don't be surprised.
Claiming it before it happens just to make sure, just like he's trying to do with the hockey teams. But in all seriousness, of course, 5 great reasons right there. And hey, James, like, this is the thing. If your team's not good, you want to at least have a young team to look forward to that could be. And I think for both of us, of course, obviously with Seattle, the jury's still out when it comes to the Kraken. But they're going to add some young talent. They're going to try to get some young talent in this expansion draft as well. And with the Mariners' young talent, just a beautiful mix for the people in Seattle. And hey, Seattle, like, don't worry. You may get basketball back there soon within these next couple of years. So just sports are booming in Seattle, man. Sports are just, being outstanding in Seattle. And you got to keep your franchise quarterback in football. So I think things are looking pretty good for them right now. But of course, that brings an end to this week's episode of the Bunts and Bruises podcast. Yet another phenomenal showing here. And of course, it was carried by this man without a doubt. James, Dr. Lopez was absolutely phenomenal. Of course, like, he has a all-access pass back to the show anytime he wants. Of course, you're going to be the one texting him, but if he ever gets the urge to talk, like, he is more than welcome to come back.
Oh, for sure, man. That was a great time. And, I just love learning more, especially about these injuries stuff, because injuries is just, we got our whole podcast named after this, Jurg. It's just one of the biggest parts of sports. You can't put it on the back burner. It happens. And everyone knows to be a championship team, aside from being good, it's also the healthiest team at the end of the day, the healthiest and the luckiest team, because you need your full team to get there at the end of the day. But speaking of the end of the day, it's a wrap for today, Jurg. You guys know where you can follow us. Follow him, Jurg K40 on Twitter. Follow me, Bars Talks, right there on Twitter. We're also, once again, we're on Spotify, we're on YouTube, and now, once again, we are on Apple Podcasts. The numbers have been booming. Thank you, Apple. I'm finally happy we're done beefing. I'll cuddle you like the little spoon, or you could be big spoon. It doesn't matter, but I'm just so happy. But the numbers are great, but we need to get them better, guys. They're rookie numbers. We need to bump them up, like Matthew McConaughey says. So remember, follow, subscribe, like. If you don't want to watch the episode, just fast forward all the way to the last minute and let it play, because I'll take that view. I'm petty. I don't care. But once again, Jurg, I had a great time. I love doing this every Monday. I'll see you next Monday, brother. Peace.